You never know with technology, you need to check. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us this morning. This is a webinar that's organized by Everystory Sri Lanka and co-hosted by CAFS. A little brief about Everystory Sri Lanka. Everystory Sri Lanka was founded in 2018, and we're a group of young feminists who identify as a storytelling collective. We work to create spaces in Sri Lanka and South Asia where underrepresented, historically marginalized and/or oppressed and alternative narratives not seen in the mainstream spaces of Sri Lanka find a voice. This is done in a myriad of ways, from developing children's books that showcase such stories, hosting and conducting activities of children and parents, curating stories of girls' resistance, and activities for philanthropic donor organizations funding work in the global South. We use creative practices, mixed media, panel discussions, and more to create these spaces. This space. We believe that stories come in all shapes and forms, and it is within this complexity and potential for creativity that we look to engage in. We're inspired by the works of Sybil Wettasinger, Jacqueline Wilson, and A Mighty Girl, amongst others. A brief about this webinar series. Since May 2020, we have been hosting a series of webinars aimed at parents in Sri Lanka to help them gain awareness on various topics, as we feel this support is greatly lacking in the local space. We have been conducting these webinars on various aspects of early childhood education in Sinhala, Tamil, and English languages. Today's webinar on riding the wave, how to manage difficult behaviors in your children, will be the fourth in the series. And our co-host for this is CAFS, the Child, Adolescent and Family Services, was initiated as a project under the Theme Institute in December 2016, and it was to create mental health awareness in Sri Lanka. CAFS is a registered independent not-for-profit organization that provides multidisciplinary services for children, adolescents, adults, and their families. Just a few housekeeping rules before we start. You will see it on your screen. Your mics and your video will be muted. Please keep it that way, because so we minimize the disturbance, or rather we keep no disturbance at all. Questions will be answered after the opening remarks. So we will have our speaker make a presentation, and then after that we will take your questions. Please type the questions in the chat box, and we will try to accommodate as many of your, or all of the questions, but please be understanding and bear in mind that we work within a time frame. And we hope that this will be a very, very useful and enlightening session. So very quickly, our speaker this morning, she's Giselle, who is the founding director of CAFS, the Child, Adolescent and Family Services. She has a wealth of knowledge and experience working in the humanitarian and mental health sectors, both in Sri Lanka and the UK. She's a child and adolescent psychologist by profession, holding a BSc in Psychology and Counselling and an MSc in Child and Adolescent Mental Health from King's College London. She is currently undertaking a PhD in Population Health Sciences at the University of Bristol, UK. Right, over to you, Giselle.
Thanks. Thanks, Prabodhini. Okay, so because this is quite a large topic, I have sort of tried to cover overall aspects. So hopefully, if there is anything that you want additionally to ask me, you can ask me after the session. So the first thing, in a sense, what we're thinking about is, why do children behave in different ways before we start thinking about bad behavior, right? So one of the things of behavior is, all behaviors are a form of communication. So there are ways of saying when they are distressed or unhappy. So for example, if a child is frustrated, that's basically possibly because they can't do something or they can't tell you what they want. If they're running around and they seem hyperactive, it could be because they have excess energy and not being able to burn it off. If you notice that your child's finding it difficult to understand, it could be because they have limited understanding. They might not know what's expected of them, or they might need a little bit extra time to process what you mean. So if you can work out what your child is trying to tell you through their behavior, then you can look for ways to prevent them becoming distressed, as well as to help them find other acceptable ways to communicate their needs. Sometimes the problem is that parents unknowingly also reinforce bad behaviors. So for example, if your child learns that by throwing a tantrum, they can get their own ways, they are more likely to continue throwing tantrums when they want something, right? So if we respond to the tantrums and give them what they want, then we are reinforcing that bad behavior, and you should ideally expect your child to continue doing that. Another thing to remember is that some types of behaviors are more likely to occur in children with particular conditions or disabilities. So for example, we've all heard the term ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So children who have this might find it very hard to stay still or concentrate for long periods of time. If a child has autism and is on the spectrum, they may become unsettled by changes in routine, which might cause them to become very upset or anxious. A child who has a specific learning difficulty or maybe a speech and language difficulty, they may find learning at school difficult without having the adequate and good support. So for those sort of children, if we provide the support, then you'll notice that their behaviors may change and they won't demonstrate or display those sort of challenging behaviors. One key thing is that if you are concerned, I know we get a lot of parents who, because now the internet is there, you can read a lot of things, and a lot of people are talking about things like ADHD, autism. If you do have a concern and you're not sure, I think it's always good to check, because I get a lot of parents who just read things and they get worried, or they hear a webinar, they get worried, and they just want to check. The rule of thumb is I think it's better to always be safe than sorry. So if you are concerned, please take your child to check. So before I go into talking how we're going to manage the bad behaviors, let's talk a little bit about how we set the scene to ensure we're getting good behaviors from our children. So the first and most important thing is to think about how you're communicating. And this, I think, applies in general, whether it's with your child, with your spouse, with anybody. Communication is key. So research ideally has shown us how powerful nonverbal cues are. So a lot of us pay a lot of focus on the words we use. What do we say? But we don't really focus on the nonverbal cues that we're sending out. And this applies for your children as well. So according to research, only 7% of a message is understood from your spoken words, just 7%. 38% is actually from the tone of your voice. And 55% is from your facial expressions. So, I mean, I've been accused of always having everything on my face, and I use a lot of my facial expressions. So it's a dead giveaway of what I'm feeling. But I think that's something that's always good to keep in the back of your mind, because technically, if our words don't really match our facial expressions, then people tend to believe the expression they see and not ideally the words that they hear, right? So when it comes to your child, if you appear sort of calm, reassuring, your child is more likely to remain or become calm and feel less anxious. So keep your language simple, give clear, consistent messages to your child. So let's look at an example, right? So let's say your child might be standing very close to a friend, and you notice that the friend might look uncomfortable and start sort of stepping back and backing away. What you can do as a parent is gently reminding your child to give her some space. So you could say something like, for example, Carol, let's give Jacob a bit more room by taking a step back. Once your child has done this, you could acknowledge it by saying, well done, Jacob's got more space now. So if you also notice that once you have taught your child this, and you notice that your child is doing it in a different setting without you actually telling the child, then it would be good to praise her for it. So for example, if you notice her doing it somewhere else, Carol, I like the way you gave Emil some space to open his presents. Something like that, where you are acknowledging that they have actually taken on board what you have previously taught them. So you're reinforcing the good behavior. You can also use nonverbal communication to reinforce your words when your child is behaving in a different way. So for example, if you need your child to stop and listen, you could try speaking in clear, firm tones. So for example, like, I'm sorry, I'm using all foreign names, but those are the easier names to give as examples. So for example, you could say, Jack, you're being too rough with your friends. Please keep your hands to yourself. So you maintain consistent eye contact. Make sure you're using your tone of voice to ensure that your child knows that you are being serious. And also one key important thing is bending down to your child's level. So you're maintaining eye contact with your child, so you're not hovering above them, right? The thing with this is, knowing our children these days, it sometimes can be difficult to match your nonverbals with your verbals, because you get children saying ridiculous things, right? Like, for example, in public, a child might suddenly point out and look at you and go, "Mommy, look at that poo head," or that lady's really fat. Or sometimes if an older adult has said something rude, your child might pick it up and say, and it might come across as funny. So in situations like this, it is tempting for us to laugh. But the thing is, if you do these sort of things, it sends mixed messages to the child, right? So your child will be more likely to understand the behavior that you demonstrated, as opposed to what you're telling them, that's funny, but you shouldn't really do it, and you're laughing with the whole process. So try to keep a straight face and use a firm tone to say something like, in our family, we speak to each other politely. If you need to laugh, go away somewhere else, laugh it out. But at that moment, ensure that you're giving the proper verbal and non-verbal messages to your child. So communication is key. And if you've noticed in the examples that I've given you, I'm telling you what you should ideally tell your child to do, instead of what instead of only telling your child what they should not do. So it's much more effective to tell them what they should do when you're managing behaviors, as opposed to constantly saying no. Another thing to ensure good behavior takes place is give your child a choice whenever possible. So this helps them to feel a little bit more in control, and that their views are actually taken into account. And this will also lead to sort of less frustrations and also improved behavior. Also give your child enough time. So it's important for your child to have enough time to respond to the choices or the requests that you've made of them. Give them plenty of time to think about what's been asked before expecting a response. And also, if you feel that your child's confused, it's okay for you to repeat if needed, right? And you can ask them, do you need me to repeat the choices, or do you need me to repeat the question, right? Again, maintaining really calm sort of tones. A very important thing that a lot of parents miss is establishing routines. So children cope more easily if they understand in advance what is going to happen. Right? So routine is really important. Emphasize desirable behavior by giving lots of praise when your child follows a desired routine, right? So not only are you establishing the routine, but you're also praising them for maintaining the routine or doing things according to the routine. Another key important thing is consistency, which a lot of parents get frustrated halfway through and they stop being consistent. So any routine, for it to work, or any form of behavioral modifications to work, it's important that everyone involved, so it's not only mom and dad, and if grandparents are in the family, even they need to follow the same routine and the same form of discipline. Otherwise, any routine you try to put in place is very unlikely to work, right? So consistency and the fact that everybody is following the same thing. Another key important thing is, I know our education system is very challenging, and I know children have a lot of work, even for kids in Montessori. But it's really important that while you are focusing on their education, you need to make sure that you're giving them enough of play and exercise. So again, research has shown that exercise is very effective and relieving stress, and also getting rid of frustrations. And also it has an added benefit of being fun. So it might technically reduce difficult behaviors as well if you give your child enough of play and exercise. The other thing is also that it's really important to reward good behavior. A lot of times we always talk about, well, we have this bad behavior, what do we do about it? But we always, most of the time, tend to neglect what do we do with good behavior. So if good behavior is rewarded, it's more likely to be repeated. And if you think about your own work environment, so just you as adults personally, you are more likely to continue something if you are being rewarded for it. You'll work harder at work if you are getting rewarded for it. If your boss doesn't really care whether you do your work or not, you're likely not to really be bothered. Same principles. Make it clear which good behavior you're rewarding and what the reward is also for the child. So don't give your child a reward before they've done what you've asked them to do, because that technically becomes a bribe. It's not a reward, right? For rewards to work, you have to be sure that your child also really wants the reward. So before you think about what am I using as a reward, make sure that it's something that your child values and they're really going to like, not something you find easy to do. And also, if you are giving rewards, reward immediately. Don't give the reward, don't make your child work for a reward that they're going to see in 2 months, for example, right? Children are, their brains like fish, for example, it doesn't hold in their head for that long. If you're rewarding, if you're punishing, it has to happen immediately. Give them praise in different ways. So praise can be a wonderful motivator for children, and we often neglect and ignore that. So help them understand that they're loved, they're cared for, they're valued. Give them lots of hugs, kisses. If they do something good, if your kid likes it, give them high fives, thumbs up, clap. You know, just make sure that your child knows that, oh, to actually get my mom and dad to respond to me, it works better when I'm being good, as opposed to when I'm throwing tantrums and being bad. Right? So any child, what they want is they want your attention, they want your love. So the more you give it for the positive and the good behaviors, the more you're going to maintain those sort of behaviors. For you to think about, when we come to bad behaviors, right, it's important for us to recognize triggers so that we can find strategies for these particular behaviors. The problem with this is, I know it's frustrating because it can take time and practice. And it's a lot of work for you to be able to identify triggers. One good thing is also sometimes to maintain a behavioral chart if you're unsure and you're finding it difficult to figure out, well, what's triggering my child to yell and scream, or what's triggering my child to hit. So have a behavioral chart where you list down what the behavior is and you think about, well, what led to this? Is it because I took Malli away, or is it because I was paying more focus on Malli? Is it because I was too harsh with how I said? So that would be a trigger. What happened before this particular behavior took place? And then think about, what was the consequence? So was my consequence actually reinforcing this behavior? Or do I need to do something that actually diminishes this behavior? So you keeping sort of a record of backtracking and thinking about what actually led to it and thinking about the triggers will help you manage these difficult behaviors. There are also instances where technically you can't remove triggers. So like, for example, let's say your kid's screaming and yelling every time they have to go to school. I mean, you might be able to figure out what that's linked to, because there are lots of reasons why a kid might not want to go to school. But let's say they just don't like going to school, so they're kicking and screaming. Or you can't really avoid sending them to school because of that. So think about, you know, strategies you can use to reassure your child to sort of gain their trust in that situation. So you as parents, and I always say this to parents, you know your child best. You're most likely to know what's going to work best for them, right? So think about what will work best for them. Maybe just singing a song, using a sort of phrase that helps them get reassured, holding their hand, ensuring that you're going to pick them up from school, letting them ride with their favorite soft toy, something that helps them sort of calm down. So it'll help with managing those sort of behaviors. Right? So that is sort of setting the foundation for the good behavior. Let's talk a little bit more about how we're responding to sort of bad, challenging behaviors, right? The main key thing, the first thing, is to rule out if there are any medical problems. So maybe there is a pain, a discomfort, they're finding it difficult to actually tell you or communicate this with you. So that could come across as bad behaviors. They might be crying all the time, they might be screaming, fighting, yelling, moody. So rule out that there are no medical conditions. Also make sure that you're prioritizing things. So I know sometimes parents come with a list of bad behaviors. So I want to address this. It's always useful to actually sit and prioritize. So focus on one behavior at a time and what's the most urgent and the most troubling behavior. Right? So it's important for your child's self-esteem also that they know that all you're trying to do is change the behavior. You're not changing who they are. You're not changing them, their personality. You're just changing that particular behavior, right? So ensure that you're focusing on one behavior and you're prioritizing the most urgent, and you're also communicating to your child that it's the behavior you're changing, not them. It's also important for you to be positive. So state or show how or what you would like your child to do in a positive way. So just like I said at the beginning, instead of saying, don't do this, it could be, please, could you do this? Right? The thing is, children find it very hard to interpret no messages. So it's always good to tell them what you want as opposed to what you don't want them to do. Also, if you can redirect your child into good behavior, again, immediately reward them. Give them hugs, praises, whatever they like, right? So they know that they need to continue that behavior. There is this term called nattering. Right? So nattering is the persistent negative comments that you keep giving. So things like, you're picking your nose again, or watch where you're going, or you're late again, can you not do this, can't you do anything, right? So those are sort of nattering, like you're constantly giving them negative comments. This ideally are poor ways to shape your child's behavior, because you're sort of nipping away at what your child's self-worth is. So again, studies have shown that this does not, in a sense, improve behavior. It actually worsens it. So you're just making your child do it even more. It also tends to make your child nervous, because you're just telling them what not to do. You're not really telling them what they should be doing. Right? So avoid nattering. Another key thing that, going back to how you're communicating, your nonverbals, try to stay neutral as possible. So if your child is displaying difficult behaviors, keep your responses to a minimum by limiting your verbal comments, right? So this again is going back to nattering also. Your facial expressions and other displays of emotions, because these may encourage your child to behave the way they are. So try to speak calmly, clearly, using just keywords and phrases, and keep your facial expressions neutral. Because sometimes if a kid's just irritated and they want to push your buttons, they will see from what you are doing that they are actually getting what they want. So the more you remain neutral and you use only the important words, and you're actually giving them what your key message is, it would be really useful. So try to stay as neutral as possible. There is also this concept of selective ignoring. So you can also ignore undesirable behavior, but that only works if you're readily acknowledging the desirable behaviors, right? Because otherwise it just comes across as you're plain ignoring the child. So you're basically ignoring the misbehavior, you're not ignoring your child. And you can state this, you can tell your child clearly that, I'm ignoring this particular thing. So for example, let's say that your child is yelling and screaming because they want to get their way. You can say something like, Jay, it seems like you're not ready to discuss about this. I'm going to leave you until you're settled and ready to have a chat about it, and just walk away. So you are stating that you're ignoring that particular behavior. You're not just walking away from the child. So those sort of things are really important. Also, I think when we are talking about difficult behaviors, it's important for us to think about what can actually affect your child. I mean, I know we spoke about how it could be a medical condition. It could also be something like, ADHD, autism. It could be something like that. But there are also other things that could affect a child, like a child who's suddenly acting up. It's important for us to think if any of these have really taken place. So things like, life changes. So life changes can be, as much as it's difficult for us adults, it is difficult for a child. And their life changes could be something like, a new sibling coming into the family, or even just moving houses. It could be difficult for some children. If, there is a change in the person who's taking care of the child, or if they've, started a play group or started nursery, or even something very, very small that for us doesn't seem like it would be something that bothers them. So it's important to think about, has any life changes taken place when you've noticed this sort of bad behavior? Also, if you as a parent are having a difficult time. So a lot of times we think that kids, especially the younger kids, that they're not going to pick up on, for example, if, mom's overstressed or dad's overstressed, or mom and dad are fighting because, we close the door, we make sure we're doing it when the kids are asleep, so they're not going to know. Kids are very quick at noticing these sort of things, right? And they're very quick at picking up. I always play with parents and I tell them, kids are like dogs, they sniff out when they know something's wrong. So if you're feeling upset, or if there's a problem in the family, they're very quick at picking this up and noticing it. So they might behave badly when, sometimes when you feel least able to cope. So if you're having problems, don't blame yourself, because, as an individual, it's likely for you to get stressed. It's likely for you to have issues. But also don't blame your child either, because the more you are stressed, you tend to be frustrated with a child who's behaving badly. But remember that it might be just their way of responding to the whole situation, because they know you're unsettled, or they know something's going wrong and they don't know how to express it. Right? Also, sometimes it might be because of how you've handled difficult behaviors before. So sometimes your child may react in a particular way because how you've handled a problem in the past. So again, for example, if you've given your child sweets to keep them quiet at the shop, then every time you go to a shop, they're going to expect sweets and they're going to start throwing a tantrum for that. So again, this is going back to reinforcement. Think about, have you reinforced the bad behavior? So how you've responded to a behavior is very important to whether it maintains or whether it gets removed. Sometimes it's as simple as just needing attention. So your child might just be throwing tantrums as a way of getting attention. And remember, for a child, attention, even bad attention, is attention enough for them, right? So even if it means that, you are doing something, you're always busy, and, if the child acts up, that's the only time you're actually stopping what you're doing, you're turning, and even just saying, stop it, stop doing that, that's enough attention for your child, right? So they're going to keep on behaving badly to get that sort of attention and response from you. So make sure you are giving your child enough of attention. You're allocating specific time during the day where you have a one-on-one time with your child. So this would also reduce those sort of behavioral problems just for the sake of seeking attention. If at all you're struggling with any of these and you've hit a roadblock, always reach out and ask for help. It's okay to ask for help. So just to highlight a few things, what's very important is being consistent. So be consistent, make discipline a priority, and be consistent throughout the whole thing. Correcting kids is about establishing standards. So whether that standard is setting a morning routine or dinner time manners, you need to establish certain standards that work for you in your household. Might not be what works for somebody else. And then you need to teach them how they can meet those expectations. So you can't just tell a child, don't do this, and expect them to know what they should do. So you should tell them what your expectations is, what the standards are, and how they can actually achieve them, and be consistent right throughout. One of the other most key important things is to believe in your child. So, it's a simple principle that when you believe your child can do something, you're ideally empowering him or her to reach a particular goal. So it's the same sort of concept when it comes to behavior. It's like, for example, if your child is too aggressive when they're playing with another child, don't, as a response to it, stop the kid from playing together, right? Instead, you can work with the child and teach them in how they can actually play more effectively, like limiting their physical sort of aggressiveness when they're playing. So you can teach them those sort of skills. I know a lot of parents come to me and say, well, shouldn't it be natural for kids to know how to play? Actually, it's not that natural. It doesn't come naturally. You sometimes have to teach a kid in what to do. So, work with your child. Believe that your child will improve and help them to achieve that goal together. I know I've said a lot of things about, setting standards for good behavior. What do you do with the bad behavior? How do you identify bad behavior? All of those things. But I think at the crux of all of it, what's really important is for you as parents to look after yourself. Because having a child is not easy. It's tiring, especially these days because, both parents are working. So, already moms and dads are stressed out. They're, struggling for time. So many parents whose children have behavioral issues talk of, this sort of frustration. And I know a lot of parents feel judged by friends, by teachers, by professionals, and they might feel that they're being a bad parent. And also it's very easy for you as a parent to, get affected by others' criticisms, right? But I think as long as you know as a parent that you are doing the best you can, that's what's important, and getting advice and support whenever you feel frustrated and you don't know what to do. Also for you personally, I think it's really good if you, do things like taking a break. So take some time for yourself. You can also talk to other parents, because I've noticed even if you have a child with special needs, it's really useful to talk to other parents because they can come up with strategies that you haven't really thought of before. Even for, for any child, you can talk to other parents about strategies. And what anybody says, don't have confidence in your abilities. So don't sort of, question yourself too much, because disciplining a child is exhausting. And you'll have good days where you feel amazing, and you'll have bad days and horrible days. It does get better, but I think as long as you sort of have confidence in yourself and in your child, that would really help you. And if you've taken some of these things that I've said, and apply them. So I'm okay to take any questions. I mean, I've just sort of roughly touched overall. I haven't really specifically pointed out on any problem, because I know we would be having a range of parents here. So Prabodhini, if there are any questions, I mean, I'm more than happy to take it on now, and I hope I stuck to time.
Yeah, thanks, Giselle. Quickly, one question that we got is one where a parent has said that the child is 2 years old and doesn't get so much attention from the dad, but then the grandparents are there and the mother is there, they all give lots of attention. And she says that suddenly she finds that the child gets violent, so like would bite, would not listen to what he's being told, would not take instructions, and also that he takes one nap during the day and doesn't sleep till like 11 in the night. So this kind of behavior, she's asking, is this normal, or whether she should sort of delve into it further. That was basically what she said.
And this is where the child is spending more time with the grandparents as opposed to...
The child spends more time with the grandparents and the mother, not so much with the father. And can get that he is okay, he's mild, and then suddenly he would become a bit violent. He would bite and he would not follow instructions, and then he would have one nap during the day and then play up, and like only would sleep at about 11 o'clock in the night.
Yeah. So I mean, I would say, just like the way I spoke about trying to identify triggers, if there are particular triggers that take place when the child is demonstrating this bad behavior, I mean, there could be a lot of reasons for it. It could be because of attention. It could be because the child wants to communicate something and is frustrated, is unable to communicate it. So what would be useful is if, the family tries to sort of identify what's taking place before this behavior happens. So it'll give an indication of what's really going on and what they can do to support.
Okay, thanks. That's great. And then another question that we've had is, okay, it's great. We do tell children to do this and do that and don't do this, and, very politely, very lovingly. But sometimes, they just don't listen. How do you get them to follow it? How do you deal with that?
So if your child is not listening, again, like I said, it's trying to identify what you are really doing, because sometimes you might be saying things in a way that your child does not really understand. Your child does not know what's expected of you. Sometimes your child's just stubborn, and I think the key thing is for parent to sit back and think, what is the consequence I'm giving my child for this sort of bad behavior? Am I rewarding good behavior? So for example, if they're doing something I don't want them to do, how am I demonstrating that I don't want them to do it? And if they're not listening to what I'm saying verbally, what is the consequence I'm giving? And am I being consistent with that? Because I have a lot of parents who, the first 1 or 2 weeks, they'll be consistent in, their punishments and everything, and they just slide. And it's difficult for a kid to understand, well, so are you okay with this, or are you not okay with this? So it's really important to identify if you are punishing that sort of bad behavior, and also are you being with it? And does your child know what you are punishing them for and why?
Great, thanks. Also, how do you draw the line between being bad cop and being firm? Because sometimes you are firm and you want to discipline them, and then you're just the bad one because you're always disciplining them. How do you maintain that fine line, being sort of disciplining them but not really the bad cop?
So, I mean, like I said, because I recently had a mom who came to me and asked me, Giselle, what do you think about hitting? Can I hit my child? And well, I mean, I do agree that sometimes a kid needs a small smack on the back, but I asked her, I was like, well, how effective is it? Is it working? She's like, no, I actually think he's kind of used to it now. So I was like, well, how often are you doing it? Like, so whenever he does something wrong, I hit him. And I was like, well, so now he's just got this thing that, oh, well, I'll just do this and mom's going to smack me, no big deal. So, I mean, your question of, how much of a bad cop should I be, how much of a good cop? I think what's important is, again, you're showing that you appreciate the good behavior. So you're rewarding the child for the good behavior, and you're demonstrating that you're displeased with the bad behavior. So you're not reinforcing that bad behavior. And once you start actually being firm and demonstrating that, you know what, I'm not happy with this, your child, from your tone and from your expression, will start learning that, okay, so this is when mom means business and she's not okay with this, or this is when it's okay. So I think not really having to go through those, extremes of where you're yelling and screaming and bringing the house down because the kids are going crazy. It's, using that sort of neutral, firm tone, that whole thing of where I was talking about, your communication is key. Not just what you're saying, your tone of voice and your expressions. So I think as long as you start doing that and you're maintaining that neutral, flat thing, your child starts knowing when you actually mean this. So you don't have to go to extremes.
Great, thanks. Also, how do you do, or rather, how can we deal with, or what can we do when a child throws a tantrum when screen time is refused?
Well, I mean, my question would be, do you have allocated screen time every day for your child? So what's important, and that's going back to routines, right? So what's important is that you allocate a particular screen time for your child. And the child needs to be made aware of this. So this is the time I eat, I play, I have a shower, I do my schoolwork, and this is the time I get to watch TV. When you're setting those routines, if you have a difficult child, what I always recommend parents to do is actually sit and come up with those time frames together, right? And if the child goes beyond that, I mean, all you need to do is go back to the routine and be like, well, this is what we've agreed on. This is your screen time, and now the screen's done. So you're stating the fact, you've already discussed this with the child, and if they throw tantrums after, do what I said about, you're ignoring that behavior. You can say, well, you know what, I don't think you're ready right now to talk about this. Let's talk about it once you've calmed down, and walk away from that situation. So as long as there are clear sort of structures put in place, I think that would be really helpful with those sort of issues.
Great. Just flowing from that, could you possibly give us some insight into screen time?
So screen time, I mean, I would say for a day, maximum an hour for a child. And you can actually split this hour as well. You could split it into 2 half-an-hour slots. I mean, the thing is, and why I keep saying that it depends on your particular family. It depends on what you prefer, because we as professionals can tell parents what we do, what to do, and what's the ideal. But I think at the end of the day, it's your child. And because sometimes for parents, the only way they can keep the kid occupied while they're feeding the baby is maybe watching TV. So I would say, trying to think, my preference would be maximum an hour a day, and you can split that up, right? So you can split it and give them that screen time. So let's say you want to feed your baby and that's why you're putting the TV on. Make sure you've given the screen time to sort of match that. So that helps. Just giving your kids phones all the time or letting them have free time with the TV is not ideal, because that doesn't also help them when they're trying to, in their studies. There are lots of negative effects when they go to classroom, because they get so overstimulated with the screen that, just sitting in a classroom and listening to somebody gets really boring. So there are lots of negative effects. So yeah, that would be my response to that.
Great, thank you. And also some listener has asked, a person who's joined us has asked that, how do you communicate with other adults, say for example, your parents or the child's grandparents, on topics like this, or your expectations from them? Yeah, so I think what she's trying to say is, how can you tell the child's grandparents, which could be husband's parents,
don't do this.
Yeah. Basically, yes, these are my ground rules. This is, these are what I do at home and what my child is supposed to stick to. How do I actually say it to them?
Yeah, and that's such a common problem that parents are having, because especially when you're living in a big family, and how do I, the parents have the discipline. So mom and dad are, in par with how the discipline is, but grandparents just throw it all out of the window. I mean, I think it's really important to sit and have that conversation, to explain to them why it's really important to set routine, explain that these are the things, because I know a lot of families tell me that, grandparents come back and say, well, we brought up kids too, so we pretty much know what we're doing. Yes, but this is how we'd like to bring up our child. And I would really respect and like it if you are able to respect our wishes. And these are sort of the rules that we would like to implement. So having that discussion. If that doesn't work, I would say minimize the amount of time they're spending. I mean, otherwise the child just needs to know that, well, maybe I have a free pass with grandma and grandpa, because how much can you push and how much can you make them understand, right? I have a free pass with grandma, grandpa, but when mom and dad come home, this is what needs to get done. And this is business. So that's the other alternative. If, you really struggle to drill home with grandparents. Not the ideal, but I guess we have to adjust.
Thank you. Also, there's a question. My child is 2.5. What kind of reinforcements can I use for her?
It depends on what the problem is that you're having. And also when you are using, so I would always say, if you are trying to avoid a bad behavior, remove something that they like. I think that would be the rule of thumb, as opposed to, punishments. Just, that's a consequence, right? So you do something bad, you're removing something that they like away from them. So for example, if you are breaking all your toys, well, if you break your toys, then you don't get new toys, stick to it, or you don't get playtime, something like that, right? So the consequences that you give is tailored very specifically to what the problem is that the child's having. And also, again, it depends on the family environment, right? So I would need to know what the specific thing is as well, to give you a specific sort of thing that you can do that child.
Yes, we also have a person who wants to actually unmute herself and pose a question. Yes, you're most welcome, Shruti. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, firstly, it was a great session so far. I just have a quick question. So I'm a psychologist. I'm working at a school in Bangalore right now. And I am working with a child who is about 4.5 years old right now. Now he has a diagnosis of ADHD. And the restlessness and getting the child to sit in one place and work has been a challenge. And we finally got the parents to agree to bring in a shadow teacher, because we felt that managing him in a class of 30 children is a little challenging for us alone. Now, while a lot of behaviors have settled down and a lot of things are going positively, like you mentioned, this system of rewarding the child when they do a behavior that we expect them to do. In this case, the parent insists on rewarding the child with chocolates. Now, what happens for this particular child, what we have observed is even a small piece of candy or chocolate in the morning, and his whole day ends up going for a toss, because he's quite a tiny fellow, though he's 4, he's really small in terms of his height and everything, and it makes him so energetic that he's really, almost bouncing off the wall. Now, we've tried to explain to the parents that, see, try a different method of reward for him, but we are really not able to convince them that chocolates or sweets are not really the way to go forward for this child, because it's negatively impacting the child's behavior. So what would be something that we could give the parent as an alternative to this kind of a reward to really benefit the child?
What have you already suggested to the parents that they're not acknowledging or they're not willing to?
So we had actually told them that there are a lot of activities that he likes doing, and there are a lot of toys that they have at home which are not given to him regularly. So we said, I think he has some favorite puzzle or something that he likes doing. So we had told them that show him the box and say, after you finish your homework or after you finish your work, we're going to sit and do this. Or he really likes playing with his older sister. And she's, of course, almost 7-8 years older than him. So we said, tell him that if you finish this, then your sister's going to play with you for half an hour. And she's completely okay with that. And we had also said that maybe instead of giving him sweet, chocolates and things like that, maybe find something that's a replacement, which is a little healthier and not so full of sugar, like dates and things like that, or even dry fruits. but somehow we are being met with a lot of resistance when we are giving suggestions like this, only specifically for this habit of giving him chocolates.
Okay, and do you know why? Like, why have they mentioned that they're not okay with these sort of?
Honestly, the response I've received from the parents is that we give him, I'm not, those Hershey's kisses
Yeah,
that come, right? Those, she's
yeah.
like, it's dark chocolate, so it's good for your health. That's the only thing I've heard from her. I've also sort of hit a wall with her when it comes to this.
I mean, it might be also that, like, are both parents working? Because maybe that's the easiest for them to do.
Actually, in this case, his mom is at home. She's a homemaker, so she
Oh,
gets to spend a lot of time with the child. And honestly, initially managing the child's behavior was difficult. So I could understand initially that this was used as a reward. But
yeah.
since he got a shadow teacher, we saw a drastic improvement in this child in a span of about 6 months. So we're really not able to crack the code on what is the issue, and they are also not being very open with us as to sharing why they do not want to stop this.
Okay, so just to clarify again, so now this problem is like you don't need to be giving the sweets in school, right? You can use whatever other strategies in school. It's only when it comes to home,
Yes.
or saying it also affects
Yeah,
school.
what happens actually sometimes is if he's had a tantrum in the morning, for example, to come to school, they'll put a
Yeah.
chocolate in his bag or they'll send like a biscuit in his tiffin.
Okay.
And then till he doesn't get that, he's really not able to focus on anything else, or else because he knows it's in his bag, he'll eat it in the bus. And then the moment he's in school, he's very over energetic and he's really, his emotions are all over the place. He ends up crying a lot and getting upset because that sugar crash happens for him. So it does impact his school work as well quite significantly because of that.
Okay. I mean, I guess that's where I don't know if the school has already tried to sort of put your foot down and tell them that this is the consequence that takes place. So we can't really support your child if you're not willing to work with us. I mean, sometimes, that's sort of a hard, firm stand because thinking practically in the school setting, I mean, you have other kids as well.
Exactly.
It's difficult for you to, like if the parent is not willing to, what she does at home is pretty much you have no control, right? If it's easier for her, you can advise her, but at the end of the day, it's up to her. But I think you need to sit her down and make her understand that, listen, when the child comes to school, in order for us to support, you have to work with us and you have to abide by our rules. Otherwise, we can't really support your child. Taking on that little bit more of a firmer stand would be much better, because if you've noticed that there are negative effects and negative consequences if he is given these sweets before he goes to school, because it's a waste of the school time as well, because then you're spending a lot of time trying to get him out of this whole mood. There's no point in him coming to school then.
Exactly, yeah.
So I think taking that sort of firm stand and maybe sit with the parent, sit with the class teacher, and that's what we usually do in the school system here. We sit with the class teacher, sit with the parent, ideally the head of the grade or even the principal, and sit and work through those things. And I think school sometimes has to be firm and put their foot down and say, if you're not willing to work with us, we can't really support you. That might get the mom to sort of, at least when he comes to school, try to follow those sort of things. Yeah, if that helps and if that's something that can be done.
I think that's something that we can look into, because my biggest concern right now is because of this lockdown that we've had, we have not interacted with the child in almost 3 months. So I am a little concerned as to when he does eventually come back to school, how will things be? That's a major concern for me right now. So I thought, let me just put this across to you and see what your advice would be in this respect.
Yeah, I mean, for these sort of kids, right, I think anyway you're going to expect, even with children who don't have these problems, you're going to expect some bad behaviors when they start getting back into school, because it's going to be difficult for them to fall back into routine. So give them some time to adjust also before, and this applies to everybody, like in general, I'm making a statement that give kids some time to adjust before you actually start raising certain things as problems, because this year overall has been quite unsettling for adults and for kids. So give them some time to adjust before you actually flag up things as issues.
Absolutely. I think that's a good idea. I think that's definitely something. Thank you so much.
Great. And I mean, feel free to drop me an email or anything if you need more advice.
Definitely, I'll do that. I'll definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Giselle. We will have to run through this quite quickly, I think, because we are kind of closing into time. But if a child cries all the time for everything, how do you respond to that child and how do you deal with that child? What do you do?
Sorry, Prabodhini, you're breaking up. I didn't
Okay,
get
can you hear me
anything you
now?
were saying.
Hello? Am I frozen? Hello?
Prabodhini, we can hear you. Giselle, can you hear us? Giselle, your mic is muted. Okay, perfect.
Earlier, you were breaking off.
Okay, can you hear
now
me now?
it's clear.
Can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear Prabodhini. Giselle, can you hear us?
Now I can hear you, yes.
Okay. Prabodhini, you can continue.
All right. No, the question is, Giselle, if a child is crying all the time for everything, how, what is it and how do we deal with it?
If a child is crying for everything, I mean, how old is this child?
The age is not there, but I think it's also mainly when they explain that they don't like what the child is doing, then the child will at least crying. Oh no, sorry, that's a different one. No, it just says a child cries each and every time for everything. How do we handle it?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be able to help it unless I know how old the child is and the history of the child. Is there any particular problems? I mean, I think it would be good to rule out if there are any medical issues, and that's why the child's crying out, because there might be some discomfort or something. Otherwise, it would be really helpful for me to know histories and understanding, because that's a very sort of general thing that's difficult to help without knowing the full details. So again, I mean, if this mom is happy and they want to drop me an email or something, I'm more than happy to help.
Thanks. Okay, this is a good one. So education is such a priority in Sri Lanka that parents focus on sending children for classes, schools and classes and additional tuition, so on. But they need to play. And how do we recommend and how do we work with parents to guide them, to enable the children to have more playtime so that they can develop their social skills in a safe way and stimulate their openness and curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, right? Because again, I think teachers struggle because even if they tell it to parents, I think parents' expectations of children differ. Like sometimes like, no, what's important for us is education. But I think incorporating, and if the parent is struggling to actually give the child some playtime, I mean, again, going back to routines, right? It's really important to sit maybe with parents and sort of structure routines. So there is a playtime that's incorporated. I mean, I get a lot of kids that are just going from school straight to classes and they have zero time for themselves and they're exhausted. If teachers notice that parents are not really able to incorporate this or they don't really find the importance of it, I think within the school system, trying to get the kid involved in some sort of sport or activity. I always recommend that, parents think about group sports as opposed to only individual sports. So something like, basketball, rugby, football, netball if it's a girl, something that helps them build their social skills, that feeling of being part of a group. So that could be something that teachers do, sort of recommending that the child gets enrolled in sort of some sports activity in school if they notice that parents are not incorporating it in their routines after you explain to them why it's important.
Thanks. Just a reminder to our audience that we can take a few more questions because we can have a few more minutes. And then going to the next question, this lady says that her son is 7 years old, but he doesn't like to be hugged or kissed or show love. How's she going to deal with this?
Has she been hugging and kissing and showing love to the kid before? Because if you haven't been doing that consistently, it would be something that's new and foreign to the child. If you have been doing it consistently and suddenly your child is not liking it, I mean, I know sometimes now kids, even really young, they feel embarrassed if you're doing this in front of other people, whereas if you're at home, they're okay with you hugging and kissing. So I would say trying to understand why it is. I mean, sit and have a chat with your kid, because sometimes if something's happened, and I mean, the sad thing is nowadays children are exposed to such horrible things. If something has happened to the child that's made them uncomfortable outside, then it's really important to actually have a chat with the child and see what's really led to it. So it'll give you a better idea then.
Thanks, Giselle. Another question is that the child is 2.5 years old, and when the parents say that they don't approve of his behavior, he tends to hit the parents, and this happens even in public. So what is it is what the parents ask.
I would say what is your response after the kid hits you? Like, are you giving a punishment? Are you giving a consequence for it? Because if you're not doing anything, it's going to establish that sort of behavior. Also, I would ask parents to think about, is that the way that you are also disciplining your child? Because if the only way you're disciplining means giving a smack to the child sort of learns that, oh, okay, if I don't like it, if you don't like a behavior, that's how you respond, you hit. So I would tell the parents to actually sort of think about, is that how they are using their discipline? Or otherwise, what is the consequence you're giving the child when they are behaving in that sort of a manner, right? And then you'll have to work through with that.
Thanks, Giselle. Also, a question about a child who's a little bit older, 13 plus, that he is very disruptive in the sense he gets very angry and shouts when he's asked to come out of his gaming time. And it started really with the lockdown because he had a lot of free time with school shut down, that he engaged in a lot more gaming, and now he just doesn't like to be taken out of it. The question is how much of this should be tolerated and how should we handle this given perhaps teenage years behavior, 13-year-old behavior?
I mean, yeah, you're right in saying that, teenagers, the behavior gets really bad. But I mean, this again goes back to my comment about how it's important to have routines established. And because it is a teenage child, you can actually sit and talk about rules and develop sort of routines with them, right? So, I mean, I would tell the parents to sit with the child and, say, well, these are the house rules. This is the amount of time that we are going to allocate and that we are going to allow you to use for your gaming. You can decide where during the day you want to allocate that time and whether you want to split it up. But the parents be firm on what is the time frame that they're giving for that particular day for the child to do gaming. So sit and have a conversation. If he doesn't listen, again, you're going to have to think about consequences. And I would say a consequence would be he doesn't get to play, then the next day you remove it. But you can sit and have that conversation so that he feels invested in the decision making as well.
Thanks, Giselle. This is about a 3-plus-year-old who doesn't like to take defeat. So even if you explain to him, no, you can't win every time, he still tries to show that he's upset about being defeated, and how to make him understand that, you don't obviously win all the time, defeat is part of it, and how to help him handle defeat.
Yeah, I mean, defeat sometimes can be a tricky thing with kids. I think maybe one thing good to do is you could use certain stories that help a child to understand, well, you know what, for somebody to win, somebody else has to lose, and you can't always be the winner. And you sort of twist the story in a sense that, well, you know what, the reason that person won as well is because you lost. So you have a role to play, whether you win or lose. So that's sort of the take on it. I would also say that parents to sort of think about how they respond when the child loses. So are you still making a big deal about it? Like, are you still looking at the positive aspects in it? Like, oh, that was a great game. You tried really hard, as opposed to, oh, you lost this time. That's okay. Maybe you'll win the next time around. So think about how you are talking to the child and expressing about defeat, right? And sometimes you can also give your own examples for the child. It's a very young child. You said it was 3 years, right? The child. So if he's a very young child, I think, you could use stories. There are lots of stories to help children understand these sort of things. You can make up stories with their favorite character about, how it's okay to lose. Those sort of things will be helpful.
Thanks, Giselle. Just going back to that question about the child who was crying, she's 3 years old and there are no diagnoses of other things. It's just that when something is denied or said no, she just cries. And I think she just throws, they say she's rolling on the floor. So she's probably throwing a tantrum when what she needs is not given to her. And this is obviously her repeated behavior.
Yeah, so I would say again, then you're going to have to think about what's the consequence I'm giving for this sort of behavior. And I mean, again, consequences could be you're removing something, you're doing the selective ignoring, so you're not really maintaining that sort of behavior. I mean, sometimes what you, like the example I gave is that, well, I'm not going to tolerate this because it's a 3-year-old kid, and it depends on how much the child understands and how much the child is able to grasp sort of communication. So it could be where you're actually saying things like, you know, once you settle down, then I'm going to come back and we can talk about it, and you remove yourself from the situation. Something like that in a sort of managing. So thinking about consequences. And again, I would need to talk with the parents, understand the family sort of setting to give them specific targeted things that they can do. I see a lot of questions coming in.
Yeah, really. Yes, there are a lot.
Long ones.
So many more, right? So quickly. So about the reinforcement, what they say is that some kids do not like reinforcements or praising of good behavior. They actually shut the mom's mouth and says, "No, I don't want to hear it." So how do you deal with that?
I mean, if they don't like the verbal praising, then you can give some other praising of, like, I mean, not praising, you can give them some other rewards. So giving them something they like, or like if they have a favorite sort of food they like to eat, you know, you can give that as opposed to using the verbal sort of praising. So you don't have to use verbal praises if you notice your child doesn't really like it. You can use something else as a reward. But make sure they know that this is why you're giving the reward, right? So you're giving it for this particular thing, for this particular good behavior.
Okay, there's a question from a mom in Dubai where she says that her child is 5 years old, and since the lockdown when they didn't go out, he has now got used to staying at home and playing on the floor. He's very sort of lazy to go out, and she doesn't get much support from the husband in this respect, and she's worried about the child's physical development and ability. She feels he's got very lazy at 5 years. What is your response to this?
So this is more in terms of no physical activities, is it? That's
yeah. The child prefers to stay inside and play on the floor.
Okay, so I mean, maybe if you are concerned about the physical activities, try to incorporate some physical things. So again, I don't know how the family structure is, but maybe, you know, getting your child to come with you for a walk to the grocery store to buy some stuff, or just getting him to do some fun things outside. And when I say fun things outside, keeping in mind the COVID and the virus, but, you know, I think certain places, some parks are open, some places that you can walk. So if you can go to the supermarket with him, getting him to go out a little bit. If he has a bicycle, and if there is sort of a area that he can ride his bicycle outside, allocating some time during the day where he does that. So try to incorporate bits and pieces of activities. I mean, you can also get him include some sort of house chores that he has to do. And again, this goes back to the concept of routines are really important. So even during the lockdown and kids are not going to school, some form of structure is important so that kids don't sort of go into being lazy and not doing anything, because getting them back into the routine is going to be difficult, right? So I would say slowly start bringing in 1 or 2 things that he has to do as a routine and build it up bit by bit. So that might help.
Thanks. Another one, sibling issues. The elder one is 3.5. The second one is 10 months, and he has not dealt very well with the arrival of the Malli. He has earlier the elder one has been with the father, but he has unfortunately had to go abroad because of work, and now the elder one has become aggressive. He hits the mother and the grandparents, and he throws tantrums for the slightest things. Try to be like Malli. So, you know, and this makes a mom yell at the child, and then the child ends up crying more, the elder one. And she's asking how to deal with this situation.
So, I mean, I think one main important thing, and I mean, I'm answering it in general, so it would help everybody. One main important thing is that before a new sibling comes in, it's good to sort of start getting the older sibling you know, invested in the whole idea. So they're aware that a new sibling's coming in, you're talking about it, you're talking about what you're going to do. So the older siblings prepared, right? once the younger sibling comes in, and from what you're saying, Prabodhini, since this mom doesn't have the dad as support, I'm pretty sure she's overwhelmed. So, I mean, try to still allocate some time where she's having one-on-one with your oldest son every day. So your oldest son doesn't feel that, you know, suddenly Malli's come over and taken mom away from me. So this is my sort of, you know, enemy because he's taken mom away. So try to have that one-on-one time with Ayya still. Also, you know, when you are doing stuff for Malli, get Ayya also involved in things. So like, for example, you can tell Ayya, you know what, oh Ayya, can you help me, you know, we need to do this with Malli. So, you know, getting him also involved in certain activities. So he feels like, you know, he's the older sibling, he's not completely neglected, and he's also invested in the new baby that's coming. But make sure that you have the one-on time with your oldest son as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Giselle. Last question before we wrap up. My son is 10 years old. His mom says that the son is 10 years old and he still needs encouragement and reminders to complete the simplest tasks. And you know, how much ever she explains, he then forgets. So it's getting a bit tiring, and how to deal with this.
I mean, I think that also you need to think about is there issues in other areas? Like, is he having difficulties, similar difficulties with his studies or anything? Because that would indicate a need to go and get it checked. But if he's finding it difficult to follow things like tasks that you're telling him to do, I would say break it down. So break it down into simpler tasks. Like if you're telling him to do 5 things, break it down into 2 things at a time. If he's still struggling, break it down into 1 thing at a time. You can also do visual things of it. So these are the steps that you need to take before you go for something. So you can have a visual representation so he remembers things. Again, reward it. If he's not doing it, give consequences for it. But I would say just check if this is also going into, you know, difficulties and problems at school and with his education. Because if there are problems, then I would recommend to go and speak to somebody to ensure that there are no other issues that's there.
Thanks, Giselle. So let's wrap up then. Very quickly, participants, could you please fill, there is a feedback form, feedback link, and it would be really, really great if you could fill that for us. And we'd like to know your thoughts as well. So please fill it for us. Thank you, Giselle. It has been really nice having you, and thanks for answering all these questions and clarifying so many questions and issues that parents had. Thank you to CAFS for co-hosting this. And thank you to the participants as well for taking time and showing interest and being here with us. Please do keep in touch with Everystory Sri Lanka and follow us, and you will, you know, get more information. Thank you very much.